So there's going to be some big changes in the Royal Mail. It is going to be sold to Czech billionaire Daniel Kretinsky, or known as the Czech Sphinx, which he's reportedly affectionately known as. It's going to be sold for £3.6 billion. It's going to be taking the postal service out of British ownership for the first time in 500 years.
Yes, so Charles I would be the last time he created the postal service.
Did he? That's good knowledge.
So there's been a number of visions in the offing about how this is going to look for some time. There was even fears at one point that the service would cease to exist altogether. There were rumours swirling that Kretinsky wanted the end of letter delivery in absolute terms. So that would mean the service would be something more akin to DPD or Every than actually delivering letters.
So what would happen to the letters?
Well, there was some sort of rather... some plans that weren't ever going to actually come into fruition.
Some blue sky thinking.
There was some blue sky thinking that actually you'd be able to send a letter and then a central service would scan the letter and email it to you. Right. There was also a plan which was probably more likely that the service would be dialed back or scaled back to once every other weekday rather than every single weekday. Anyway, that's the joys of privatisation, because Royal Mail doesn't make any money, right? It lost about £1 billion in the last financial year. It's not a profitable business. But this is where it gets a bit tricky, and this is where it gets a little bit suspicious. So on one hand, and I'll play you a little bit of the interview that I did with Dave Ward, who's the General Secretary of the CWU union, the Communications and Postal Workers Union. Sphinx. I'll play that a little bit for you later. But I forgot what I was going to say. I'm really having a hard time today.
Is this a good or bad thing for Royal Mail?
Okay, so unions are semi-relieved, as the deal done means the government will retain a golden share in the overall operating of Royal Mail. So any change to its ownership or tax residency or headquarters will need approval by the government. But there were huge concerns about a foreign investment takeover, because it will be the first time that it's controlled by an overseas investor. And the question is, why does he want to own it?
Yeah.
He's already he's got a couple of stakes in the UK economy. He's got around a 27% share in West Ham, the football club. He's got a 10% share in Sainsbury's, and he's got various other little bits in the energy sector, or plans to invest in the energy sector. But the big question is, why do you want to take over a failing business? And there's this really troubling quote that actually Prospect magazine located from 2015. So he was asked by some students when he's at this sort of symposium, I guess, like, why do you go after dying businesses? And he said, we want to make money in industries that are dying because we think they'll die much more slowly than the general consensus says. And then his biographer explains that he wants to be one of the top billionaires in Europe. And if he needs to fire people, he will do it. He won't be afraid of it. He's a businessman. What's most important for him is that he won't lose money with a business.
Those two things seem slightly like at odds with each other.
Yes. So there's this question looming, which is, okay, why you like to pick up failing businesses, you don't think they'll do as terribly as is projected. Is that because you have plans to take on the great name and then break up part of the business and sell it off? Mm-hmm. Typical billionaire.
Typical bloody billionaire. Why is he called a Sphinx?
Because he's sort of seen and not heard.
I fucking hate shit like this.
Okay.
Like, as in, like, I think that's such, like, so he's seen in that he sometimes appears in public and doesn't give quotes.
Well, I'd like to be, he doesn't ever speak.
But, like,
he rarely gives any input. He did actually meet, though, with the unions over the weekend, and they
said, your Excellency Sphinxman.
Yeah, they came.
Does he dress up like the Sphinx?
You'd have to ask him.
But
that's not what I asked Dave Ward earlier. So here's the General Secretary of the Communications and Workers Union speaking to me earlier.
The context of this takeover bid is the fact that the company was privatised, and prior to it being privatised, it was liberalised. Governments chose, and a Labour government at that point chose to end the monopoly that Royal Mail had in advance of the rest of Europe. Similarly, obviously, since it's been privatised, these type of things are likely to happen in that world. I think that what we've got here, though, is an opportunity and the best platform we've ever had to potentially renationalise Royal Mail at some point in the future, because The government have agreed to take a golden share in Royal Mail. We're happy that that's taking place, but they've also agreed a range of other protections that will hold Kretinsky to account and are ongoing. And within that, with the change in governance, which is a radical new way of a private company being run, with much greater say for the workforce, so there will be concerns, understandably, about a foreign equity investor taking over a company as big as Royal Mail and as iconic as Royal Mail. But the context to this is that we know that the status quo is the biggest threat to the future of our members' jobs and UK postal services. We've seen a Royal Mail board that have systematically run the company into the ground. We've seen them foul customers on a daily basis, and we've seen them completely alienate and attack their own workforce. I think the government are probably looking for further investment from Kretinsky, maybe in the energy sector. And that's what obviously the government have set out as their number one mission, which is to grow the UK economy. Now, we have to deal with the realities of this situation. And what we are absolutely convinced about is that, set against the status quo, whilst we still have concerns about the future, and they'll continue, and we believe we're strong enough to deal with those under the terms of this agreement, this is a better option than allowing the current Royal Mail board to continue.
Should it ever be privatised in the first place?
So that was the vocal sphinx that there.
So you see there, he's talking about that the unions are quite pleased because they've managed to secure some of the rights for workers that had been up in the air for a number of years now. So that means that Kretinsky won't be able to do any of the asset stripping that was first feared. He won't be able to reduce the number of days that Post has delivered. But the big question really is about privatisation, and should it have ever been privatised in the first place? Because it's it's almost like a royal asset.
It's utility.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And it's whether you believe that having Post delivered should be a social right or a market decision.
Yeah.
It's sort of like the trains. Trains have to run, which is why the government ultimately oversees a number of the operators. And actually, Labour have changed it now that they're going to oversee all of the operators, because people have to travel the country, right? That is your social right in the United Kingdom. And it's a question about whether that should be the same for Post. Should it just be a loss maker? Anyway, Darren Jones, who is now the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, but we interviewed him last year, and he was very concerned about privatisation, and here he is.
They've said, oh, okay, we're making a mint over here on parcels, but we're not willing to use the money from that to pay for the letters bit. So the letters bit gets run down. They might be losing £1 million a day in the letters bit. And then they come back here to Westminster and they say, can we have some more money from the public, please, because it's not making enough money. Well, hang on a second. Making loads of profit on your parcels. You're giving out hundreds of millions of pounds to your shareholders, and the leadership of this failing business, failing because it's losing £1 million a day, is being paid a bonus and hundreds of £1,000s a year, and in their long-term bonus package, doesn't mention letter deliveries once. So the business is completely failing in its delivery of a public service, and that's often a consequence of privatisation.
What do you think it speaks to? What do you think it speaks to more broadly in our society, that all of those things can be happening, and yet the leadership of the company feels that they can go cap in hand to the government, to Parliament, to say, we need this cash? The brass neck of it's quite extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. But look, the Conservatives and the Liberal Democrats in government did it. So on the one hand, the government was cool with this because it allowed it to happen. And so you partly don't blame them. I mean, if you're a private business and you're a private equity investor or a hedge fund owner or whatever, you put your money where you make profit. That's their business. Well, fair enough. And so they're investing in the parcels business. They're not investing in the letters business. I mean, if you had £1 million to spend and I said, would you give it to me? I'm going to lose it in one day and not give you anything back. You'd say no, right? So if government wants these public services to be delivered, it has to construct a regulator or a market design, or actually just run it as a public service in order to guarantee it. And this has been an example of a kind of failure around